Quiet. Good morning. Make some noise. A little late, but you know, got in there. All right, we're going to continue now, or start our study in Joshua. How many got my email on Wednesday or Thursday? Received them. I hope I expressed myself, but I'm excited about the study of Joshua.
Wow.
It's some good studies. It really is. I hope I do it justice, but as we go into this study. Courageous living. Before we start the scriptures in the book of Joshua, we need to do a little background on Joshua and the Israelite people. You can't just go in and start a book and you don't know where you are in the Bible. What period of time? Where are we? What just went on? Where are we going? And so we'll put a little bit of information in here. I'm going to give you some history this morning. And it's always a good thing to do when you start a new book. Joshua's original name was Hoshea, meaning salvation. Did you know that was his name before he was Joshua?
I didn't know.
In number, huh?
I thought that was Hosea.
No, this has an H.
It has a.
I didn't put the H in it.
Thank you, Joel. I was looking for a way to shoot her down. I couldn't do it. So, in Numbers 13:16, Moses changed Hoshea's name to Joshua, which in the Hebrew language is Jehoshua. Yes, I'm not sure if I said that right. But the new meaning of Joshua is God is salvation. So look what he changed his name from to. His name was salvation. No, Joshua, you are not salvation, but God is. Now, the scripture doesn't tell us why Moses did this, so you can form your own opinions why he might have changed the name. But here he changed it, and so now it means God is salvation, not just salvation. Now, the first mention of Joshua is in the Old Testament, and it was in the book of Exodus in chapter 17. Now, Joshua was charged by Moses with selecting and commanding a military group for their very first battle after exiting Egypt. It was against the Amalekites in Rephidim. So here they have come out of Egypt as slaves. They're out now, and they crossed the Red Sea, and they're moving on. They're ready for their first battle, and Moses chooses Joshua to lead them into battle. He's got to be strong. He's got to be courageous to step up and do this. The Amalekites were known to be furious warriors. And they bring a bunch of slaves out of Egypt with probably not a lot of weapons. And you tell this man, go fight this trained bunch of warriors over here. You've got to be strong. You got to be courageous, and you have to have faith that God is leading you out there. Do you remember the story about Amalek? Scripture starts off with this: "Then came Amalek." When Moses held up the staff of God over his head, the Israelites were winning the battle. Y'all remember that story?
Right.
But if Moses got tired and he lowered that staff, the Amalekites were winning the battle. So when Moses became tired and his hand went down, Aaron and Hur stood one on each side of Moses and lifted up his arms and held them up, it says, till the sun went down, and the Israelites won the battle. Faith in God. Hold up the staff and you win the battle. Later, Joshua was identified as one of the 12 spies that was sent by Moses to explore and report on the land of Canaan. Only Joshua and Caleb came back and gave an encouraging report. We can win this battle. We can do this. With God's help, we will win a battle. The other spies that went with Joshua and Caleb, they come back and they report, oh no, the Canaanites were giants. They were not giants. False report. They were giants, and they're fierce warriors, and Israel could not win the battle over them. Now the Israelites could have entered the promised land from the south, and it would have been a lot closer, a lot quicker for them to enter from the south. But because of their lack of faith, God made them wander in the wilderness for 40 years. I don't know if you can see my little arrow moving. Okay, they came down here, Mount Sinai, and they went back. They could have entered right here where that red arrow is and gone into the land to possess it. But they didn't. The spies came back and said, we can't do it. We can't win the battle. Oh, ye of little faith. So God made them, get my cursor back. He made them wander in the wilderness. See this down here? He wandered for 40 years in the wilderness, where most of that older generation died out. All of the spies that went with Joshua had died, and then he starts moving them up. Now look where they have to go. They have to go all the way up to Mount Nebo and come in from the east. What a waste. I believe that God's plan was for them to go into the south. And they didn't have the faith and the courage to do it. So they paid for it. They had to wander for 40 years and then come back around. Now, once the Israelites reach Mount Nebo, which is located across the Jordan River from Jericho, God told Moses to give the task of assigning the land by tribes to Eleazar the priest and to Joshua. Now, that's a lot of faith in a man, two of them, Eleazar the priest and Joshua, that they were going to determine what section of land each of the tribes settled over there. These two, along with then the leader of each tribe, sat down and they divided up the land by tribes and established their borders. You can see that God had a lot of faith in Joshua. Now remember, Moses did a bad thing, and because of it, God told Moses he would see the promised land, but he would not enter into it. What was the bad thing that Moses did that God disallowed him to enter into the promised land? How many of you know? Okay. Beulah.
Hit the rock, didn't he?
He hit the rock. What's wrong with that? He did it one time before and water came out.
That was not told to.
But God said to what? Speak to the rock. The first time that they come out of Egypt and they were hungry and they were thirsty and they had no water and they were moaning and groaning. Poor old Moses, better off we died in Egypt, at least we had water. And God said, take your staff and smite the rock and water would come out. So they did. Now later on they moved down further, and this time God says, speak to the rock. Well, Moses didn't. I think he was so angry at the people, he hit it with his staff. He did not do what God told him to do, and did not do it the way God told him to do it. Now, I don't know why that was so important to God, but he says, I told you to smite it the first time. The second time, I told you, speak to the rock. But he struck it with his staff. And as a result, God said, because you disobeyed, you'll get to see the promised land, because he's going to go up on Mount Nebo and look across the Jordan River, and he's going to see the land. But he will never cross the Jordan River physically. He will not enter into the land. Now with that kind of background, we're going to start reading today's scripture in Joshua chapter 1. And we may find a stopping point in there to get some more history in here and some maps so that you can see exactly what's happening. In Joshua chapter 1, the first verse says, after the death of Moses, of the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide or assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then you into the land I am about to give to them, to the Israelites. Poor Joshua. Now, it was enough that Moses appointed him to be the commander of the military. But now Moses is gone, and not only is he commander of the military, but now he's over everybody, men and women and children and everything. I mean, what a gigantic task was given to Joshua. God's still speaking. He says, I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. So every place that they walked upon, God would make sure, he said, I'll give it to you. I will be with you, and I will help you to win the battle, to run out the enemies and possess the land. Your territory, God's still speaking, your territory will extend from the desert down to the Sinai, going down towards Egypt, to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, and the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. Now there's two places in the Bible, in the Old Testament, where God spoke and told what the boundaries or borders of Israel would be. One is in Numbers, and the other is in Ezekiel. They're kind of slightly different interpretations, but it's hard to interpret because the land had changed in a lot of times too. But if you look at, you see here, the red line represents the borders. If you only read the book of Numbers, that would be your best interpretation. And then if you read in Ezekiel, the blue line kind of represents. So it's not much difference, is it? It's not worth a big deal. So God said, just go in and possess the land. Here are your borders. And I'll tell you right now that the Israelites didn't do a very good job of going in and possessing all that land. They failed miserably in two places. First of all, down at what we call today the Gaza Strip.
Right.
You hear that in the news all the time? They never went in there. The Philistines were in there and they felt like they couldn't defeat them. They did not possess the land. They did not have enough faith in God. So as a result, Gaza Strip today is still a thorn in the side of Israel, isn't it? What if they had just followed God's instructions and obeyed Him? He said, anywhere you set your foot, He said, I will be with you and you'll possess the land. They could have had the Gaza Strip. They wouldn't have all these problems for all these years. But now it's a thorn in the side. The other thing is moving north. And you don't hear much about this, but right here, I don't know if you can see it from back there, that's Damascus. And you see where the borders are supposed to go way above it. But everywhere you check, they never went any higher than about right here. Mount Hor right there, that's as high as they went. So Damascus today is what? What's part of Syria over there? And so they did not go all the way up. You don't hear much about that. I don't know if that's a big deal or not. The rest of it was pretty cut and dry. To the south was the desert. To the west was the Mediterranean Sea, except they didn't get the Gaza Strip right next to the Mediterranean. And the Jordan River going all the way up was a border on one side going up. So it kind of gives you an idea. This was the land they're supposed to possess. Really?
I was contemplating how they would divide that land, having never seen it.
Yeah. I went through that too. How do they do that? God's leadership? I don't know. How do you win a battle with a bunch of slaves going up against warriors that are trained? You know, like Amalek. And yet, God does it. But yeah, I don't know how they do it. Scripture doesn't tell us. Charlie?
He kind of had an unusual way of attacking. Instead of just going from the top or the south or north, he went right to the center.
Yeah.
And then they went both directions there.
Yeah, I did. And we're going to get into that as the book of Joshua rolls along.
But that one part of the country, Caleb, which was with Joshua, the good spy, he claimed Judea, so
Yeah.
he knew where that was.
Yeah. They must have had some insight. But we're going to see next Sunday, before they go into the land, they send spies over there. Joe Bath's going to teach next Sunday. He's going to teach us about the spies they sent in before they ever crossed the Jordan. They sent spies over there. Again, talking about being courageous. You had something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Joshua and Caleb went in with the 12 to survey the land.
Mm-hmm.
And so they knew a lot about it.
They knew about the southern part. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't tell us how far they went in,
I know,
but they
I was
probably
looking
got a
at
pretty
that.
good idea. But one thing they did know, they said they'd come back with poles with the grapes hanging on them, and they were plentiful,
So
and they had all of this, and they were huge. And they knew when God said it's a land of milk and honey, what did He mean? He meant it was a plentiful, the growth of the place. You could just grow all kind of fruits and vegetables and stuff. It was great land. Whenever the Jordan flooded and moved out, it just made real fertile land, and it watered it well, and it was great.
And you know, today, they have so restored the land that they export their fruit and vegetables all over Europe.
Yeah.
They're so productive.
Yeah, Israel is such a small nation. When you back off and you look at the size of it down there, it blows my mind how they won the 6-day war. It's such a little, but we know it's because God's on their side. And I hope America always defends Israel and keeps them as an ally. I hope we always stay there. Yeah. Okay. Now the Israelites were camped on the east side of the Jordan River. And they were across the way was Jericho. Now they're waiting on God for instructions to enter the promised land. To give you a closer view, we'll bring it up. There's Jericho. You see the Jordan River is there. And they're camped right where this red star comes up. They're camped right here. They're waiting for instructions for God. At least they got that right. Wait for instructions for God and then go. How many times do we in our lives get ahead of God? We try to go, and after we fail, we say, well, God, why didn't you help me? Wait a minute. Did you ask him before you went? Well, no. You've got to follow God's instructions. So they're sitting there waiting now for God's instructions about how to go in and take the land. It continues, and God is speaking. He says, no one will be able to stand against you all of the days of your life. That's a long time.
That's a good promise, isn't it?
It is. No one will be able to stand against you. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you, you being Joshua. I will never leave you nor forsake you. That's a great promise. Be what? Strong and courageous. I'll underline that. God's going to say that about 3 times to Joshua. Strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give to them. The land he promised to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to their descendants. So they're on their way to having that promise fulfilled. Verse 7, God's still speaking. He says again, be what?
Strong and very courageous.
Now he added very courageous. If I was Joshua, I'd think, oh, is it going to be that bad? I got to be very courageous. Well, he would. To be over all those people. Be careful to obey all the laws of my servant Moses gave you. Now, it's not just the 10 Commandments that he brought down that he gave him, but later on, God gave Moses more laws for them to follow. And he says, you know, obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. What might that indicate?
If you don't obey, you're going to pay the price.
And if you don't keep the laws, then you're not going to be successful wherever you go. So God is saying, I'm going to go with you, I'm going to help you, I'm going to support you, I'm going to be there for you, and make you successful. God said, keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be, again, prosperous and successful. Now, we've got to warn you, we've got some preachers in the world today, then you will be prosperous and successful. We've seen some on television before saying, you know, if you'll just be faithful to God and send your money in here, you're going to be prosperous. And that's not the kind of promise that he was making here. He was making the promise that he says, I will be with you as long as you're following me. But God doesn't mind people being successful. God doesn't mind a person being rich and having a lot of money. He really doesn't. Matter of fact, if they tithe, it's even better. That's not in his plans. He doesn't care if you're rich or you're poor. He cares about your heart. And are you following God's will? Yeah.
Yesterday when I was studying, one of the things said that the command for care is keeping God's law is not work righteousness. The keeping of the law was an external evidence of Israel's faithfulness to God.
External evidence is something that somebody could see. Keep on. It started out real good right here with the laws and stuff, but when we get down to where they finally had scribes and Pharisees and Sadducees, then they went overboard on the laws. They were trying to do the right thing. We put down the Pharisees because we see a lot of the mistakes they made, but they were trying to do the right thing. So they took these laws, and they'd take this law, and then underneath it, they would try to describe it, so they'd make more laws, like this one, you know. And then all of a sudden, they were bound, so they could hardly move. The laws got so stringent. That was not what God intended. He said, take the seventh day and rest. It's a holy day unto the Lord. It's the Sabbath. He said, rest on the seventh day. Well, then they decided, said, do no work. What is do no work? What can you do? So they got 166 rules of what you can do and what you can't do as far as work. They know how many steps you can walk away from your home on Sunday and turn around and come back. So then they got real clever. They decided, well, what's the definition of home? If I can only say I go 50 paces, and if I go more than that, I'm on a journey, and so that's wrong. So they would go 50 paces, and they'd dig a hole, and they'd bury a pot and cover it up and say, that's my other home. I have a possession. Now I can go 50 paces there, and I can go 50 paces there. I mean, so the law got abused. It was not the way God intended. Just take the basic 10 commandments and follow those, and you're going to be good. You're going to be good in God's sight. But when they try to take the laws and they try to interpret it, that's what the scribes were for, to help interpret the law. They made it so hard on the poor Jewish community, trying to follow every little law on there. God's really concerned about externally how we live, but He really cares about what's in our heart first. He really does. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. This is the third time that He's told Joshua this. To be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Now that's a big one. Because it's easy for us to get discouraged, even as Christians. When our health doesn't go the direction we think it ought to go in, when problems are happening over here, and it's easy to get discouraged. Don't be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people to get your provisions ready. 3 days from now, you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God has given you for your own. 3 days, and we cross the Jordan. What do you think is going through the minds of the people? It's an open question. There's not an exact answer. What would you think if you was one of the people?
There's a river.
There's a river in our way. Yeah.
And there's a walled
There's no
city.
bridge. There's big warriors over there. So it was not an easy thing, but Joshua had to be the leader to encourage his people to follow him wherever he went. But to the Reubenites and the Gadites and half the tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, and we'll get into this, remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you after he said, the Lord your God will give you rest by giving you this land. Your wives and children and your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you on the east side of the Jordan, but all your fighting men ready for battle must cross over ahead of your fellow Israelites, and you are to help them until the Lord gives them rest, as He has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land the Lord your God is giving them. After that, you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the east side of the Jordan. Here's what we're talking about over here. The dark line is the Jordan River through there, and that's one of the boundaries. And there were 2 tribes, 3 tribes, but Manasseh was split in half. and there was 3 tribes that they had asked permission from Moses, could we stay on this land? Because that's good land on the east side of the Jordan too. So Moses gave them permission to settle that land over there. There's the tribe of Gad, Reuben, Manasseh, only half the tribe, the other half went on. And what he's saying is you have permission to stay over here, but you're going to have the men, the leaders, the rulers, go with the other Israelites into the promised land, and when they conquer all their land, then you can come back and settle. And that's what he's talking about here. And I put a question at the bottom. Did the tribes, these 3 tribes, agree to that? Well, let's go to the scripture and find out. Then they answered Joshua, whatever you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. That sounds like this classroom. Nick and Wanda and Glenda and I said we need people to step up and do things, and they said, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this, and you people just stepped up when we lost 9 people out of this class, and we filled every position just like that. It's amazing. So they were asked here, you know, to leave your family and your children behind, go over there and help the other Israelites win their land and come back. He said, what? And he said, whatever you have commanded us, we will do. And wherever you send us, we'll go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. Talking to Joshua. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey it, whatever you command them, we will put to death. That's good backing, good support. Only, and he's talking to Joshua, you Joshua, be strong and courageous. Isn't that amazing? God said it to him 3 times. Now here's the leaders of these 3 tribes, and they're telling Joshua, only you, Joshua, be strong and be courageous. They need that in their leadership. Talk about courageous servants of God. You've seen that word all over the building, and the sermons are based on being courageous. Moses. Remember when God told Moses that he wanted him to go to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go? Remember that, the burning bush? It took courage for Moses to say yes. Actually, Moses didn't say yes without a few objections and a few feeble excuses. How would you have felt if you had been Moses, standing before God and knowing that this was a gigantic task that he was asking you to accomplish? Now here's Moses. He sees the burning bush. God speaks to him, and he says, I want you to go to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go. And Moses is thinking, this is not scriptural, this is me. Moses is probably thinking, hey, I'm wanted for murder in Egypt. I'm not going back. So he started making as many excuses as he could. He didn't think about the power of God and how God would be with him. He's just thinking, I don't want to go back over there. So for Moses to finally step up and do this, and he did it because he said, my speech is not good. They think he might have had a stuttering. And God said, well, I'll give you your brother Aaron, and I'll tell you, Moses, and you tell Aaron, and he'll speak for you. That's how they did it. But God still didn't make Moses. He still encouraged it. Moses finally accepted to do that. Took courage to do that, didn't it? Especially since you were wanted for murder back in Egypt. Now Joshua, think about the promised land. Moses had always been the leader, and Joshua was his aide and the commander of the army. I got this job over here, and I'm handling it. I don't want another job. I don't need a bigger job. But God asked him to, and accepted. But now being asked by God to lead Israel to the promised land and command the Israelites without Moses, because he's always had Moses there for him. It was going to be a gigantic task. But Joshua accepted the task. He was courageous, and he was a faithful servant. He stepped up. Let's talk about the leaders of the tribe of Reuben and Gad and half the tribe of Manasseh. Those men were asked to leave their families behind and lead the men of their tribe into battle with other tribes until they had settled their new land. Now, what courage and obedience that must have taken them to do that. I mean, you say, well, no, I don't want to leave my family behind and all, you know. They were courageous, they were bold, they were strong, and they obeyed. This is what God wants you and I to be. He wants us to be bold. He wants us to be strong, be courageous, and be obedient. Just like God went to Moses and said, I have a task for you. He was a big one. It took courage. Just like he told Joshua, you're now not going to be just the general of the army. You're going to lead all of the Israelites. That was a big task. They accepted it. The three leaders of these three tribes that were going to leave their families behind and go over to battle and come back. It took courage, and they accepted, and they stepped up. So there's a place for everybody in this classroom to step up. And guess what? Many of you already have, and we appreciate it. So many of you say, I'll do whatever you want. But you know, God might be asking you to step up, and it may not be something in this class. It might be across the street from you. It might be next door to you on either side. God's saying, step up, be bold, be courageous. It might be in your family or my family that God's saying, I want you to be bold and courageous. Is it hard to witness to family members?
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard. And so he says, be strong, be bold, be courageous. And maybe there's someplace else that has nothing to do with this class or this church that God is saying, I'm going to put in front of you this week. And when you see it, step up, be strong, be bold, do not be afraid. I will be with you. God has plans for all of us. Sometimes we're too busy in our everyday life to see it, and we miss opportunities on there. Be bold, be strong, and be courageous.
There was one thing in the commentary that I thought was interesting. It said Joshua was not called by flaming letters across the sky, but an older man who knew God and knew Joshua and saw that he was fitted by God to be a leader.
Yeah, yeah.
It occurs to me when I think about all this, Joshua being a leader, leaders inspire. He had to be an inspirational person. And the fact that when he went in as a spy and came back being so adamant, we can do this,
Yeah.
God has said. He was a man of God from his youth. He loved God, he obeyed, he did what he was asked to do. And we as a flock need inspiration. And everybody can be an inspiration
Yeah.
to someone.
Well,
And you don't even
right.
know who. You know, it's just, that's why all those things you're urging us to do are so important. Because you don't know, and we've heard this all our lives, you don't know who's watching you. You
No, that's
have
true.
no idea who you're affecting.
Well, go back to what you just read about there was no flaming letters going across the sky.
Right.
This week, you and I will probably have an opportunity. And it won't be big, bold letters across the sky to tell you. It'll just be, as you move through your daily life, God can open a door real quick and say, I need you to step through. Somebody. It might be the lady that works in the store somewhere that you do business with. It might be the lady that trims your toenails when you get a pedicure that needs to hear a kind word, that needs to hear something from you that might light a spark in her. And so anything could touch you this week. God can touch, yes.
Like Joe was saying about Joshua being leader type when he was young, he was even chosen by Moses to go up part of the way to the mountain when he got the 10 Commandments. So he's kind of groomed for the job.
Yeah, I think Moses was grooming him all along. And I hope that we've groomed Jerry, that when he walks over here and teaches his own class now, that he can be successful and he can groom another teacher to break out of there and go, and it just continues going on there. Well, I hope that this week that you're aware that God might plant something in your path. Fran, we're glad that you came to visit us today. We hope you come back and visit with us again. There's some good people in here.
I can tell.
And you can find a lot of good teachers, but you won't find this kind of people.
You won't find this kind of a teacher.
It's good people. Let's have our closing prayer. You may stay seated. It's okay, you can stay seated, because I know there's some